Subchapters. He works with the Medical Examining Board and a number of other medical-related professions. And he's going to give us a little presentation on overall ethics. Tom, take it away. You don't have to use it. You can use it.
Thanks, Greg. I'll rely on this. I don't know if my voice is that loud, but everyone hear me in the back? Okay, good. Yeah, my name's Tom Ryan, and I've been with the department for 11 years. I'm an executive director with 16 different boards and affiliated credentialing boards and councils. And so my background is in public administration and law. I've been here 11 years doing executive director work, working with the boards. Mainly that means I work with chairs on compiling agendas. I work with other members of the department on putting the agenda together, resolving issues that board members have. I advise on policy, and I work with other divisions on operational aspects of boards, making sure what boards want done gets done, following up with them, and serving as a liaison between the board and the department. But what I want to talk to you about today is, and I drew the short straw, so I get to talk about ethics today. Actually, the long straw. It's a pretty interesting subject. But before I do that, I want to reiterate what Secretary Ross said. We don't often, in what we do, get a chance to thank our board members, our committee members, our council members as often as we would like to, or as often as we should. And so I want to restate what Secretary Ross said and thank all of you for stepping forward outside of your daily lives to do something that's compensated at a rate of $25 a day plus expenses. Okay? We understand that you're making a big sacrifice by doing this and stepping into the public arena and making yourself available to protect public health and safety. And so I just want to say that to you and to my board members and the rest of you. Thank you, and thank you for being here today. Ethics is an important subject and one that philosophers have talked about for centuries. I went to law school. I had a number of ethics classes or ethics components to classes I took. Have been in classes where ethics is discussed for years and years going back to high school. And I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. So when I went to look and try to simplify this subject before we get into the law of it, I wanted to come up with a definition. And I wasn't very successful in coming up with an exact definition because it's such a big topic. So I wanted to ask you if you have ideas. Anyone in the audience have any ideas on what we're talking about when we're talking about ethics? Anybody? Okay. Well, what I came up with was 3 different things. Ethics means adhering to reasonable standards of conduct, having well-founded standards of right and wrong, and a continual study of moral beliefs and conduct. Okay, this is just 3 different points I wanted to make about it that describe what ethics are. And today we're going to get into what ethics means for you as public members, or the statutory definition, the statutory term is state public officials. Once you're defined as a state public official, you are brought into the ambit of the state's ethics laws. So it's a good thing you know in advance what they are so that you can avoid trouble. The consequences of violating the ethics code can be severe. Okay, so you've all seen cases in the media of government corruption where public officials end up in prison, or they do the perp walk, or something else that's damaging to them, their reputation, their liberty. Okay, I have not seen anything that severe in my time here. In fact, I don't recall a violation coming out of this department. But these cases complaints can get filed, cases can get referred to the district attorney's office, fines can be issued, and newspaper articles can come out that are damaging to a board and individuals' reputations. So we want to be careful. We want to know what the law says. the state agency that administers the ethics laws is the Wisconsin Government Accountability Board. And the state ethics code is written into Chapter 19, Subchapter 3 of the Wisconsin statutes. And I encourage you all to take a look at this and get it direct from the source when you get a chance. Okay? Chapter 19, Subchapter 3. Now, that's where the law is. Okay? That's what the legislature says, weighs in on what the state ethics laws are. Within that, there's a lot of things you need to know because cases come out where, again, the law is not always clear, and if a complaint gets filed or something comes to the ethics board's attention, they have to weigh in on what the ethics ruling is. Okay? So there are guidelines and opinions in addition to the state ethics laws. Okay, but what is the government accountability? The GAB and its staff enforce the election, ethics, lobbying, and campaign finance laws to reduce the opportunity for corruption and to maintain public confidence in representative government. And this is made up of 6 former judges. They have a staff. There's an attorney there who I will call fairly regularly when I have a question in my own capacity as a state employee to check in to see what the proper route of conduct is in any particular situation. Okay? This is a resource that's available to you. However, what I encourage of my board members, and what I think other executive directors do as well, is that you contact your executive director if you ever have a question about anything ethical related. Okay? Because we can access resources for you. We're familiar with you and the work you're doing. Often we can answer a question without much further research or inquiry because we've seen it before, or we can put you in touch with the resources you need. This is going to be on SharePoint, our SharePoint site, but I wanted to put this up here so you have it. You can write this down if you want to. Or you can Google the Government Accountability Board for all this information and get it off the internet. As I mentioned, there are statutes. The Ethics Code is in Subchapter 3 of Chapter 19. From there, the Ethics Board has written guidelines, which is at this link here. Okay? It's basically telling you the do's and don'ts as public officials, and we'll get into that a little bit later. There's a toll-free number and a Madison-based number you can call, an email address, as well as a staff directory. But know that there are both ethics laws, ethics guidelines, and ethics opinions. Okay, you can't stop by just looking at the law, at the statute. You got to dig a little deeper. These guidelines I found are really helpful because they're a good translation of the statutes, and it's a good place to start. Sometimes the opinions aren't directly on point. And a lot of the guidelines, some of the guidelines you're going to see don't necessarily apply to the work you do. Because what we run into is not so much the campaign finance laws, but the ethics and lobbying rules. Okay? Those are the ones that you really have to pay more attention to, although the others are important as well. One of the main points that comes through in Chapter 19 in the Ethics Code is this matter of conflict of interest. So what is conflict of interest? It's having any interest, financial, but not just financial, direct or indirect, or engaging in any business or transaction or professional activity or incurring any obligation of any nature that's in substantial conflict with the proper discharge of the board member's duties. Okay? So this is pretty broad language, right? It's pretty broad language. And when I see language like this in the statutes, my inclination or my first instinct is sort of, when in doubt, steer clear. Okay? I had a dietitian professor in college. He said, the rule on throwing out food that's been sitting in your fridge for a while is, when in doubt, throw it out. It's sort of similar here. When you're in doubt, take yourself out of a situation, okay? Because it's really not worth running into a conflict for you or your colleagues on the board. That said, Gibson versus Berryhill is the U.S. Supreme Court that deals with this issue. It had to do with a case regarding optometry in Alabama. It's an interesting case if you care to read it. Conflict of interest comes through that case as pretty much a wide open topic. There's also something called appearance of conflict of interest. When you appear to be in a position of conflict of interest or bias in a particular case, And bias being a preconceived opinion or predisposition to decide a cause or issue in a certain way. Okay? So it may not necessarily be strictly construed as a conflict of interest, but it doesn't smell good. Okay? And the best thing to do if you're in a position like this and feel you do have an appearance of conflict or a bias, again, is to recuse yourself. And what that means at the board level is a couple of things. We appreciate it if you've got a board business coming up or a board meeting or something, and you notice you have a conflict, all right, or feel you may have a conflict. We ask that you notify us in advance. Send me an email, call your executive director. If you don't realize it until the day of the board meeting, you do need to declare your conflict, okay, at the table, then get up and leave the room, all right? That's the best way to avoid compromising the situation the board is adjudicating. You'll abstain from deliberations and the vote on the topic. So what we're trying to avoid is that the risk that your judgment or actions are unduly influenced or that your impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Going directly to the statute, and this area of conflict has to do with your appointment to the boards, not your conduct so much as you get there, but your appointment to the board. You can't be an officer, director, or employee of an organization that promotes or furthers the profession that your board is regulating, okay? So this means you can't really be officer, director, employee of an association is sort of the obvious selection here, and serve the board as well. Okay, and if any of you are in that situation, bring that to our attention as executive directors, and we can advise you on it. This isn't to say you can't belong to an association. In fact, we see a lot of people who are association members that serve on our boards. But if you get to a certain level within that organization or being paid for something, that's when it gets to be a problem by the statute. For public members, there's a certain amount of distance that's required, okay? They can't be licensed, certified, registered, or engaged in the profession being regulated, or married to someone who's that close to the profession, okay? So not just credentialed or engaged, but professionally associated with anyone so credentialed or so engaged, okay? So we need to be careful about that as well when we're appointing public members. And Eric talked earlier about how difficult it is to get public members. This is another hurdle we have to clear in getting them. Another prohibition on public members is that for some boards you can't be engaged in a profession or occupation concerned with the delivery of physical or mental health care. Okay, now this gets into the conflict of interest part where it has to do with conduct, okay? Your conduct as a board member. When you're dealing with board business, when you're sitting around the board table making decisions, all right? You may not, and this is right from Chapter 19, 19.46, you can't take any official action substantially affecting a matter in which you, a member of your family, or an organization with which you are associated has a substantial financial interest, okay? You can't sit on a case involving your own company or your own employee. Use your office or position in a way that produces or assists in the production of a substantial benefit, direct or indirect for the official, one or more members of the official's immediate family, either separately or together, or an organization with which the official is associated. Okay, substantial benefit, key term here. Also, direct or indirect, that's pretty broad, okay? We don't exactly know what that means, just from the plain language here. And this is where the guidelines and the opinions of the ethics board can come into play if ever there's a complaint filed, okay? They'll sit down, they'll adjudicate it, and decide whether there's an indirect substantial benefit, okay? And as I said before, I wouldn't want to be in a position, or do whatever I can to avoid being in a position where that has to be adjudicated in something that I've been sitting on. When you know you have a conflict or feel you have a conflict, again, we ask that you bring it to our attention. We can have a discussion. We can involve legal counsel or general counsel as necessary. We need to make that conflict public and then disqualify, okay, so that the fairness of the proceedings are less likely to be questioned. these are the guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And so they're translating section 19.46. These are the do's and don'ts, okay? And later on, when we get through these, I want to go through some case scenarios. I got 6 or 7, depending on time, if we can get to them, where I'm going to bring in some actual situations and describe some of the issues I spot, okay? Not necessarily to give you a cookbook or a recipe on how to avoid things, but to generate ideas and awareness in what to do if you're faced with one of these situations. But these are the things you shouldn't do. And the first couple are related to the statutes I had on the board earlier. You can't act officially in a matter in which you're privately interested. So think about that. If you own a company, or if you sit on a board, okay, if you are with an organization that provides continuing education that's recognized by the board you sit on, okay? Use your position for private benefit. Oftentimes people will be on boards and their competitors will come before the board, okay? How close is that competition? Okay? And what do you do when you decide it's pretty close, maybe too close for comfort? Accept transportation, lodging, food, or beverage except as specifically authorized. There's been a lot of ink on this with the ethics board and the guidelines. There are a lot of guidelines around transportation, lodging, food, or beverage. And I can't emphasize to you enough to be very careful in this respect because the rules are there, and if you're not aware of them, you run the risk of running afoul of them, and you don't want to do that. We can help you to see where the lines are drawn. It takes a while to get to know these too, because sometimes it gets complicated. But you're not to solicit or accept rewards or items or services likely to influence your official duties. You know, in the worst cases, this is accepting a bribe, right? I mean, people end up in prison for that. Okay, so be aware that that's a guideline with the ethics board as well. Accept anything of pecuniary value from a lobbyist or lobbyist employer. Okay, pecuniary value. Again, I think you want to err on the side of accepting nothing, right? From a lobbyist or lobbyist employer. We call it lobbyist principle. If you know someone who's not a lobbyist, but they work for an organization who employs one, that person is a lobbyist that works for a lobbyist principle, okay? And you're going to want to know, who's lobbyist and who isn't. You can get on the Government Accountability Board's website and check. There's an Eye on Lobbying section where you can look up all the registered lobbyists in the state are there, all the lobbyist principles are there, okay? It's good for you to be aware of who you may be dealing with, who is a lobbyist or has someone with their organization registered, because the ethics laws and the ethics prohibitions are heightened in those situations. You shouldn't offer or provide influence in exchange for campaign contributions, and I'm assuming a lot of this is common sense, okay? But we do need to review this. Use confidential information to receive anything of value. Greg talked about how in a lot of your meetings you're going to be in closed session. That information has heightened sensitivity to it and needs to be protected. Use your position to obtain unlawful benefits. Charge a fee to represent a person before a state agency. Enter into public contracts without notice. And again, I've given you the ethics board's website there. So these are the guidelines. These are the main prohibitions. There are others, but I picked out the ones that I've seen are generally come into play for board work. So this is a case where you got a board member is confirmed as a member of a board by the state senate without disclosing he's the vice president of his professional society. He then attends DSPS board member training and discovers this is a conflict. What should board member A do next? Contact his executive director. What would happen is, it's likely if it's found that this is a conflict by the statute, the board member would probably have to resign one or the other position. Okay, so someone is a treasurer for the state medical society. You know, and a lot of this stuff is, you know, it's well-intentioned and it's very innocent, and it just needs to be brought to people's attention that it's a conflict, and then it can be resolved. Board Member B attends the annual meeting of her professional association. At the meeting, she meets association employee A for coffee in the lobby of the hotel. The employee offers to pay for the board member's coffee. How should Board Member B respond to this offer? Decline it, right? Nothing of value from a lobbyist or lobbyist principal. Board Member C has offered a ride to Madison for a board meeting by a friend who's not a lobbyist. After checking the GAB's website, he discovers that his friend's company employs a registered lobbyist. Should he accept the ride or decline it? That's probably something of value, right? I should decline the ride. Board Member D is invited to deliver a speech at her professional association's annual conference about a rule the board wrote. The board reviewed and approved the board member's travel. The association offers to serve her lunch on the day of the speech. Should she accept or decline the offer? The offer of lunch, that is. Would it be okay to accept lunch? She's going to give a speech. There's a guideline on this, and I want you to, there's actually a whole page of instructions on board travel. This actually gets at an exception, okay? If you go to speak to a group and you're on state business, there's an exception to the law that says you can't accept a meal or you can't accept a lunch, okay? Provided that the expenses for the lunch and the lunch is reasonable, actual, and necessary, okay? So if you're going to speak, make sure you get board approval first, right? If you're going without board approval, you're entering kind of a gray area. But if you go, you can accept a meal. Okay, Board Member E owns one of 2 dental clinics in his remote northern Wisconsin town. The owner of the other clinic in town is before the board for a disciplinary proceeding. What should Board Member E do? I would recuse. I mean, I think even, and we got into talking about, okay, well, you know, first of all, they probably know the person pretty well, okay? But even if one clinic specializes in orthodontia and the other specializes in teeth cleaning or, you know, caries filling, they're doing different things. I think the perception of bias is also something here you need to consider, and the ability to act objectively, okay? Again, when in doubt, you know, I think erring on the side of caution. Yes?
In that case, should the board member also keep his opinions to himself, or even if he knows facts about this other dentist, should he not say anything to the board? Just say, I'm going to get out of here.
I think you announce the conflict and then you leave the room. The other has if you do a noisy recusal, it has a potential of prejudicing the board one way or another. You don't want to do that, right? Yes.
You mentioned the possible appearance of a conflict of interest, and I'm thinking that applies not only in this case but also in number 4, where you're accepting a lunch. I realize you're exempt, provided, but it is something of pecuniary value, and it could be construed as a possible bribe.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, if you're uncomfortable with that, then you don't need to accept it. But I just wanted to point that exception out to you. Okay, and again, it's within the state, reasonable, actual, and necessary. Okay, so it may not be a bright line yes or no. Yes.
I've been running into this a lot, so I've been trained well by Dan Lyns. So I go to Dan first before the meeting, and like you said, to be more professional and subdued. And we kind of discuss things like this in the agenda first, and that seems to be working out. I seem to be accusing myself more and more, but I feel more comfortable that way for the rest of the meeting. kind of get it done before you.
Yeah, that's good. I think if you have a spot on the agenda to do that, to announce that, it's a good reminder, for people if they see anything, because people won't often read the agenda until a night or two before and not encounter a conflict until they're coming through that, and they want to bring it to our attention as soon as possible. However you can do that, the best way you can figure out to do that, I'd encourage it. Board chair's spouse works in the same profession as the chair. The spouse's company employs several licensees whose files come before the board in disciplinary and application-related matters. What should the board chair do when those cases arise? Well, we have a board I worked with for a while had this situation, exact situation, and it got to the point where he was recused in every case. He recused himself when one of his wife's organization's employees came before that board. It wasn't his employee or his organization's employee. His wife was in the same profession and had employees that would routinely come before the board. The board member has a consulting contract with an organization that sets standards and approves CE courses that are accepted by the board for its biennial CE requirement. A board discussion is held concerning CE course requirements for members of the profession. Should Board Member F participate in the discussion? No. And I would say that for all CE-related matters, this person would be best to recuse him or herself from the discussion and step out of the room. There's actually an ethics board opinion on this exact scenario. Okay, are there any? We got one more. Board members representing her board at a national conference. She's invited to a reception by a professional organization that's holding a meeting in the same hotel. She consumes 2 shots of bourbon and appetizers at no charge. Is this okay? Not the bourbon part.
Oh.
Yeah. What do you think? It's an unrelated organization that's holding a meeting down the hall, but they hold a reception for and informally invite people of the other board members at the Regulatory Association meeting. Well, again, this may cause sleepless nights if you do go and consume, and maybe it should. The ruling with the ethics board is when you go to a national conference, these kinds of receptions have got to be on the program, the official program that you're attending, part of the official program that you're attending. Okay, so you need to be careful because sometimes associations will meet in concert with the National Regulatory Authority. Okay, and people aren't often differentiating between whose reception is whose. But you got to check, and if it's not listed on your program, you need to check and see if it's officially part of your program or not, just to verify. You may run into this. Any questions? Yeah.
If a recusal would bring a board below quorum, do they have to punt that subject matter to the next meeting, or do they still act on it?
That's a good question. They would have to figure out a plan B. Okay. If it brings them below the quorum that they need to do business on it, yeah, they would be able to decide. We'd have to talk about options for dealing with that. If you have open seats on your board, that's when we scramble to get those open seats filled. And that can happen. In some boards you need more than a simple majority to issue licenses, for example. So if a couple people are absent, you got a recusal or two, it can affect the outcome of the vote. Okay, any other questions? All right, thanks again for your attention and for serving the state of Wisconsin.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, let's take 10 minutes and meet back here at 10:45.